My job was simple: get in, cut out the rare alloys from its power core and get out before the station's decaying orbit became my problem. I was a scavenger, a polite term for a tomb robber. My name is Jace, and loneliness was the currency I traded for freedom. The silence was broken by the grating shriek of stressed metal. A support beam, weakened by time and micrometeoroids, had snapped. My dinghy, tethered to that section, was torn away, sent tumbling into the void. The shockwave threw me against a bulkhead, and the world went black. I awoke to pain, a familiar companion. A deep throb in my shoulder and the metallic taste of blood. The emergency lights of my suit cast a sickly green glow on my prison. I was trapped deep inside the station, my ride home a distant glittering speck. My long-range comms were shot. I was just another ghost haunting the halls of Ozymandias. Days blurred. I moved through the gargantuan corridors, a wraith in a pressure suit. The air was thin, recycled a million times, tasting of rust and decay. I survived on my suit's emergency rations, my movements slow and deliberate, conserving energy. The scale of the place was obscene. Cavernous cargo bays that could hold moons, silent mess halls set for 10,000 phantom diners. It was a monument to hubris, and I was its sole living inhabitant. Or so I thought. It was in a decaying hydroponics bay that I saw the first sign of life. A footprint in the thick dust, small, unshod. Not mine. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hand went to the plasma cutter on my hip, a tool, not a weapon, but the only defense I had. I followed the tracks, my breath fogging the inside of my helmet. They led me to a small maintenance conduit, the door half sealed. I peered through the gap, and I saw her. She was huddled in the corner, a small child curled in her lap. My first thought was that my oxygen-deprived brain was hallucinating. Her skin, it was the color of a deep starless twilight, a soft, impossible blue, and beneath the skin a network of delicate veins pulsed with a soft cyan bioluminescence, a captured nebula brought to life. Her hair was a shock of purest white spilling over shoulders that were too thin. Even in the dim light, covered in grime, her clothes little more than tattered remnants of some alien design, she was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. A fallen goddess hiding in the guts of a machine. She was whispering to the child, a little girl who was a paler, more fragile version of her mother, her own light flickering weakly. As I watched, the woman's garment, a thin, dark blue robe, shifted as she adjusted the child. It slipped from her shoulder, revealing the elegant, sharp line of her collarbone and the smooth expanse of her skin. The cyan glow was brighter there, a vibrant, living tracery of light on dusk. My breath caught in my throat. A wave of heat, sharp and unwelcome, washed through me. Then the shame hit me, cold and immediate. She was a refugee, a starving mother, and my first instinct was a base, selfish desire. I hated myself for it. I tore my eyes away, focusing on the grimy wall, my heart pounding with a mixture of awe and self-loathing. I must have made a sound. Her head snapped up, her eyes, huge and dark like polished obsidian, widened in terror. She pulled the child tighter, instinctively shielding her, her body becoming a fragile, defiant barrier. The light in her veins flared, a subconscious threat display that only made her look more magnificent. I raised my hand slowly, retracting my helmet with a hiss of depressurization. The recycled air stank, but I needed her to see my face. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice a rough rasp, the translator on my collar word, turning my words into a series of soft, melodic clicks. She didn't relax. Her eyes darted from my face to the plasma cutter on my hip and back again. Fear and a fierce maternal protectiveness radiated from her. The child, Kevi I would learn was her name, peeked out from behind her mother's arm, her small face a mask of weary curiosity. I moved with excruciating slowness, unsealing a nutrient paste packet from my suit. I placed it on the floor and slid it gently across the dusty metal toward them. "For the child," I said. The mother, Nira, watched the packet as if it were a venomous snake, but the hunger in her eyes, the desperate need she was trying so hard to conceal behind a wall of pride, was a raw, physical thing. She looked at her daughter, whose gaze was fixed on the packet with an intensity that broke my heart. Finally her pride broke. With a hand that trembled slightly, she reached out and snatched the packet. She opened it and gave the whole thing to Kevi, who squeezed the contents into her mouth with a desperate, pathetic eagerness. Nira watched her, her expression a painful mix of relief and profound humiliation. She had kept her child alive, but she had been forced to accept help from a stranger, an unknown variable in her desperate equation of survival. And in that moment of surrender, her beauty was somehow amplified, a fragile flower blooming in the wreckage. We moved to a new shelter, a former observation deck at the station's highest point. A massive armored window, cracked but intact, looked out onto the silent void. It was cleaner here, less claustrophobic, but it was also colder, a creeping metallic chill that sank into your bones. Our days fell into a fragile routine. I'd work on the station's systems, trying to find a working shuttle or a comms relay. Nira would explore nearby sectors, scavenging for anything useful, scraps of fabric, uncontaminated water filters. We barely spoke. The silence was a buffer, a carefully maintained space between my guilt and her pride. But the tension was a third presence, a constant hum beneath the silence. I was acutely aware of her every movement, the way she walked, with a fluid grace that defied her exhaustion. The soft melodic sounds she made when she spoke to Kevi, the faint floral scent that clung to her, a ghost of a world I couldn't imagine. I would find myself watching her when she thought I wasn't looking. My mind would betray me, replaying the image of her slipped robe, the glowing skin of her shoulder. The end of my supplies was the catalyst. I had 2 nutrient packs left. Kevi was a little stronger, but they were both still painfully thin. The light in Nira's veins seemed dimmer each day. I gave them one of the packs, and the gratitude in her eyes was mixed with a terrifying, dawning panic. She knew what the dwindling supply meant. That night the cold was worse. I had a small, self-heating thermal blanket. I laid it over the sleeping Kevi. Nira watched me, her face unreadable in the dim starlight filtering through the viewport. When I turned back from the child, Nira was standing directly in my path. She had positioned herself so I couldn't move past without touching her. Her chin was held high, a desperate regal pride in her posture. But her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. "Your resources are almost gone," she stated, her voice a low, trembling whisper that the translator rendered with painful clarity. "We cannot repay what you have already given." "Repayment isn't necessary," I said, my voice gruffer than I intended. I tried to step around her, but she moved with me, blocking my path. "For me it does not matter," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But Kevi, she is my light, my purpose. Without her, my own light goes out." She took a deep, shuddering breath, and her pride finally shattered, leaving only raw, terrifying desperation. The air crackled. The offer I had been dreading and, on some dark, despicable level, fantasizing about, was laid bare between us. It was a sacrifice, a surrender. She was offering me the very thing I had been fighting not to want. The temptation was a physical blow, a white-hot spike of desire that made my head swim. I saw it all in a flash, the imagined feel of her skin, the release of my own aching loneliness, and the vision made me sick to my stomach. No, the word was a gunshot in the quiet room. It was too loud, too harsh. I saw her recoil as if I'd struck her. The last of the light in her eyes died, replaced by a profound, bottomless shame. She had offered her final coin, and I had thrown it back in her face. She didn't cry. She just crumpled. She wrapped her arms around herself and turned away, her back a testament to her humiliation. She retreated to the far corner of the room, curling into a tight ball, making herself as small as possible. I stood there, my own hands trembling with the force of my restraint. I had done the right thing, but it felt like the cruelest act of my life. I hadn't just refused her body. I had, in her eyes, refused her. I had confirmed her deepest fear, that she was utterly, completely worthless. Later, in the deepest part of the sleep cycle, I heard a sound, a tiny, hitched breath. I looked over. Nira was awake, her face buried in her knees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Hearing those words, hearing the depth of her self-hatred, was a blade in my gut. My honorable act had become just another weapon used against her. The station's decay was accelerating. A few days after the offer, a low groan echoed through the decks, a sound of ancient metal finally surrendering. I was trying to hotwire a schematic panel, tracing power lines to find a viable energy source for the maintenance shuttle I'd discovered. The air was thick with the smell of burnt insulation and my own frustration. "Is there anything I can do?" Nira's voice was quiet, hesitant. She had been keeping her distance since that night, a ghost of shame at the edge of my periphery. I grunted, pointing to a mess of cables. "I need to get behind this junction box. The release valve is stuck. If you can hold this light steady and pull on that lever when I tell you, maybe we can get it open." She nodded, her expression serious. The space was a cramped service conduit, barely wide enough for one person. I had to contort myself, wedging my shoulder against one wall to get leverage. She moved in behind me, holding the portable lamp. The sudden proximity was a physical shock. Her scent, that faint floral aroma mixed with the station's dust, filled my senses. "Okay," I grunted, my muscles straining against the rusted metal. Now she pulled. The lever screeched but didn't budge. "Again," I said, repositioning. She set her feet, putting her whole wiry strength into it. As she pulled, she lost her footing on the slick floor. She stumbled forward, her body pressing flush against my back for a split second to keep from falling. Time stopped. Her breasts were pressed against my shoulder blades. The warmth of her, the softness, it seared through my suit. One of her hands came up to brace against the wall next to my head, her slender arm brushing my neck. A cascade of her moon-white hair fell across my cheek, impossibly soft. My breath hitched, every muscle in my body went rigid. It was an accident, a simple, clumsy accident, but the contact was electric, a jolt of lightning that lit up every nerve ending. The moment stretched for an eternity. Then, with a mortified gasp, she scrambled back, pulling away as if she'd been burned. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice tight with embarrassment. The lamp in her hand trembled, sending fractured shadows dancing across the walls. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I rested my forehead against the cold metal of the junction box. My eyes squeezed shut. It's fine," I managed to rasp, my own voice unrecognizable. "Just hold the light." The air in the conduit was thick enough to choke on. The accidental intimacy had shattered the fragile peace. Now the silence wasn't just about shame, it was about a shared, undeniable spark of contact. A truth that we could no longer pretend wasn't there. And it made the space between us feel 1,000 times more dangerous. Things got worse. The groan I'd heard was a death rattle. A main coolant pipe, running through the sector above us, finally burst. It wasn't just a system failure. It was a deluge. Icy, rust-colored fluid rained down through the ceiling panels, mixing with the centuries of dust on the floor to create a thick, foul-smelling sludge. The temperature plummeted. It was a new kind of hell. The cold was relentless, seeping through my suit, let alone their thin rags. I found them huddled together in a corner that offered the least exposure. Kevi was wrapped in the thermal blanket, but it was soaked. Nira was curled around her, shielding her from the worst of the deluge, her own body racked with violent shivers. Her clothes were torn and plastered to her slender frame with streaks of reddish-brown grime. The mud caked her white hair and skin. Her lips were chapped and tinged with blue. The luminous veins in her skin were a dull, sickly gray. She was degradation personified, and yet through the misery, through the filth and the cold, her beauty was still there, a stubborn, defiant ember in a dying world. My heart, a thing I thought had been hardened by years of solitude, broke. This was my fault. I had brought them to this exposed place. I knelt beside them, my own movements stiff from the cold. I took off the insulated outer layer of my suit and draped it over both of them. It was heavy, warm, a fortress against the encroaching frost. Nira looked up at me, her dark eyes huge in her pale, stained face. Her teeth chattered. "Please," she began, her voice a fragile, cracking whisper. "Don't," I cut her off, my voice gentle but firm. "Just rest. I'll fix this. I promise." She finally relented, slumping against the wall, her energy gone. Later, after I had managed to divert the leak and the immediate danger passed, I brought her a canister of clean water and a strip of fabric. She just stared at her reflection in the dark surface of the canister. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of pure, baffled wonder. It made my throat tighten. She saw only her own ruin, but I saw her resilience, and my gaze, it seemed, was telling a truth her shame couldn't accept. But the cold had already done its damage. By the next cycle, Kevi was burning with fever. Her small body, already weakened by malnutrition, had no defense. She was delirious, her breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. Nira was frantic, a low, keening sound of pure terror humming in her throat. She held her daughter, rocking her back and forth, her own light dimming in sympathy with her child's. "My medkit," I said, my voice sharp to cut through her panic. "It has fever reducers, antibiotics. I don't know if they'll work on your biology, but it's our only chance." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, surrendering her child's fate into my hands. I worked quickly, loading a pediatric hypospray. The trust she was showing me was a heavy weight, a responsibility I felt in the marrow of my bones. After I administered the shot, Nira didn't let go of Kevi. She just held her, whispering to her in their language. I sat with them, a silent partner in their vigil. The hours crawled by. Toward the end of the cycle, the fever broke. The rattling in Kevi's chest eased, her breathing deepened into a teethful sleep. The relief in the room was a physical presence so thick I could taste it. Nira looked up from her daughter's face, her own streaked with grime and tears. She stared at me, her expression one of raw, uncomprehending gratitude. Without a word, she reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it flat against my chest, right over my heart. I froze. Her palm was cool even through the fabric of my undersuit. I could feel the slight pressure, the silent, desperate thanks conveyed in the touch. My heart hammered against her hand, a frantic drumbeat. For a single, selfish moment, I let the contact remain. It was the first willing, gentle touch I'd felt in years, and it was an agony of pleasure. With a will I didn't know I possessed, I covered her hand with my own. Her skin was unbelievably soft. I held it for a second, a silent acknowledgement of her gratitude. Then I gently lifted it from my chest and placed it back in her lap. "Get some rest, Nira," I said, my voice thick. I stood up and walked away, putting the length of the room between us before she could see the tremor in my own hands. The unspoken word, "don't," hung in the freezing air between us, a monument to my restraint and to my pain. I managed to get the shuttle working. The ride out of the hangar was violent, a barely controlled crash into the void. But we made it. We were free of the Ozymandias. The dead Titan receded behind us, a monument to a forgotten age. In the small, quiet cockpit we floated in the silent majesty of space. Kevi was asleep in the back, safe and warm. The alarms were silent. The struggle was over. All the tension, all the longing and restraint and pain had evaporated, leaving behind a fragile, powerful peace. I looked at Nira. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow of the navigation console and the distant stars. She had cleaned the grime from her face, but the memory of it, the ghost of her degradation, made her current serenity all the more profound. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. She was hope. She turned and met my gaze. There were no more walls between us, no more power imbalances. We were just a man and a woman who had saved each other in more ways than one. This time, when I leaned in, there was no hesitation, no guilt, no restraint. This time she met me with equal certainty. The kiss was a cataclysm. It was a release of every unspoken word, every stolen glance, every moment of painful denial. It was the taste of starlight and survival. Her lips were cool and soft, and I poured all my loneliness, all my gratitude, all my aching reverent desire into that single perfect connection. I pulled back slightly, my breath unsteady, my mind reeling. I looked into her dark eyes, searching for regret, for fear. I was still the scavenger who held their lives in his hands. Had I crossed a line, taken advantage of the relief of the moment, she must have seen the conflict on my face. A soft, knowing smile touched her lips. She raised a hand, not to push me away, but to cup my cheek, her thumb gently stroking my jaw. "That," she whispered, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any desperation, "that was my choice, Jace." And then she initiated the second kiss. It was different from the first. The first was a desperate collision. This was a slow, deliberate exploration. It was tender, yet possessed a confidence that sent a tremor through my entire body. It was a kiss that said, "I see you, I choose you, I want you." There was no shame in it, no sense of transaction. It was pure, unfiltered want. When she finally drew away, the space between us was filled with a new kind of heat, a comfortable, glowing warmth. The painful tension was gone, replaced by an aching, beautiful tenderness. Then she did something that stopped my heart. She took my hand, the one that had refused her, the one that had trembled with restraint, and she brought it to her neck. She gently pressed my fingers against the luminous, pulsing veins. My fingers trembled as I traced the glowing patterns down to her collarbone. She closed her eyes, leaning into my touch, a soft sigh escaping her lips. I leaned my forehead against hers, closing my own eyes, overwhelmed. We didn't need any more words. We didn't need to look at the stars. For a long while we just stayed like that in the quiet of the cockpit, an embrace of profound intimacy, a man finally allowed to touch the light, and a woman who had reclaimed it as her own to give. The journey ahead was unknown. But in that moment we were no longer adrift. We were anchored to each other.